Hello, everyone. This is a video overview explaining what to do for two different groups of students. On the one hand, we have some students who have submitted the first attempt of the outline to help create a plan for the upcoming Garber rough draft, and some of those students need to redo or revise the outlines for them to be truly helpful in writing a rough draft. And then we have a group of students who, for whatever reason, have not yet attempted the Garber outline, but I think it's really important to do so because this is a thinking document that helps you plan out your rough draft. It eliminates or minimizes the tendency toward writer's block, and it will streamline your draft. And if it's on point, which this video hopes to make sure of, then it will ensure that your rough draft is at least on the right track. So the first thing we need to do is to make sure that everybody understands Garber's thesis and understands where it comes from. I think a lot of people may possibly have only read the Garber article once as part of the hypothesis assignment, but anytime we're working with texts, you're going to read and reread them over the course of that unit many times so that you can process them more deeply. And one of the things that I wanted us to do after we read it was create the reverse outline, which I have a copy of mine here. The purpose of the reverse outline is to uncover what a person has done or what they have argued after they've already done that. So you're kind of reverse engineering their argument to see what was their thesis, what were their points, how did they make their argument or whatever. And something like this can be supremely useful in creating an outline for an upcoming paper, right? Because for this particular paper, you have to frame all of your claims around Garber's. Your thesis has to be framed around hers. Your topic sentences have to be framed around her very specific claims and so on. So if you have a map of what she did, this helps you create a map of what you're going to do in your upcoming essay, because part of what you're going to put in your outline is going to be, some of the things that she has put in her argument, because you're responding and reacting to those. So her thesis, I'm going to show you my paraphrase from it, and then you can see how accurate you think that is. I say here that Garber's worry is that entertainment and digital media threaten our critical thinking or grip on the truth, empathy, and civic engagement. If we click into her essay or her article, we see that at the very end of the do a dance section, in the big last full paragraph before the end, she's talking about how if we're not careful, we're going to end up not too far off from the characters in the dystopian novels that she mentions in the beginning part of this section, which is her hook for the rest of the essay. She says, if we're not careful, we'll become so immersed in entertainment and digital media that many people will forget how to think, they'll forget how to be empathetic or kind to one another, and they will forget how to govern and be governed. So this is related to democracy, political engagement, civic engagement, that kind of thing. So 1, 2, 3, these are her main claims in her stated thesis in the argument. So those are her main claims. So your thesis has to, formulate opinions about her claims on these things and or other big points that she makes in some of the sections. But these are part of her explicitly stated thesis. And then she makes some secondary points that all of these probably do fall under one of these three umbrellas technically, but some of these may be interesting enough that you may want to treat them almost like independent points, and that's fine too, but you need to be able to extract the accurate topic sentences about those to be able to include those. So the first order of business is understanding what her thesis is. Like, what is she arguing? What is her stance? What are the specific things that she is saying that entertainment does something, has a negative impact on? And so these are three. These are a couple of others. You may see others, so don't limit yourself to these. This is why you've got to read an article several times. You've got to you don't have to create a reverse outline, but it's useful. Or you have to have other methods in place, like taking reading notes and things like that, so you can break it down and figure out not only what she says, but what you think about what she says. So um, a lot of brain work goes into that. The next thing we need to understand is the actual assignment. And so when I say the assignment, I mean two things. You have to understand the essay assignment itself, which is the very first document in the top of our unit. So you have to understand what you've been asked to do here, and have a clear handle on what the instructions say to do for the outline. Well, we know for the essay that it has to be framed around the specific arguments presented in the article. And so that means you have to have topic sentences that are framed around Megan Garber's specific points. And we just saw from the document here and in her article what her main points are. These are the main three: the negative impact on critical thinking, empathy, and civic engagement. These are some other options. So you're going to have to choose which points you want to deal with in your paper. And again, you may see others, but you have to focus on her main claims, the ones that are stated in her thesis or in the other big sections. Another really important thing to understand that a few people have misunderstood is we are not writing a rhetorical analysis. So we're not grading her on how well she did or didn't do on the essay. We're not going to organize this into chunks of what Garber does well and what she misses the mark on. You have to enter into the conversation with her point by point. So that means that you're dealing with whichever points you're deciding from her main ones or from secondary ones, that a few of which I have examples here, and you may see others. Just make sure you're dealing with main points and not some minor something that's actually part of a bigger point, or something that she's doing just to be dramatic or whatnot. So you've got to make sure that you're doing these things. Some people organized it more like a rhetorical analysis. Oh, this is what she does well, this is what she misses the mark on, and those things are kind of all lumped together. So you may have some good things there, but you're really going to have to go back and organize it point by point. So I'm going to pull up an outline from a current student in a face-to-face class. I've removed her name um, from this. And before I go any further, let me say that her hook has some bad words in it. So there's the F word and there's another curse word in there. And normally I wouldn't, show that kind of thing in a video, but it's a really good example of this student coming up with a really specific hook, and it has a basis in social media like Reddit. So if you think you're likely to be offended by seeing these things, please stop the video now and fast forward it a few seconds, or um, plunge forward if you think you can, deal with that for just a moment. So her hook is based on the AMA subreddit thing and who the heck did I marry in the digital landscape. That's her idea for a hook. It's certainly going to work as an attention getter, but maybe she should, kind of condense this to AMA, because that's how they present it in Reddit. It's like the AMA um, subreddit where people ask, am I the jerk because of, this situation, and so on. So that's the idea for her hook. Then she's got to establish the issue, which is what Megan Garber argues, and then she's got to state her thesis in relation to that. So in this one, she's got some things that she agrees with and some things she disagrees with. So she says, although Megan Garber's article from The Atlantic makes compelling points on how the digital media landscape has now bled into our real landscape, mixing our entertainment with reality and tarnishing critical thinking, her points regarding how empathy has evolved only brings awareness to pre-existing issues that have only been exacerbated. So she's got a small typo here, but it's a good thesis. I can also tell that she hasn't used AI for this, which I love, because the outline, ideally, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, ideally you want to try to do the whole outline all by yourself, because it's a thinking document. It's a planning document. And if you offload that too early or too much to AI, then it removes your presence from the outline. It removes your thoughts. It removes your creativity and all of those kinds of things. So you really want to try to avoid that. And we'll come back to her outline in just a second. Actually, let me show one other thing. So here is one of her topic sentences, and she had asked me, can I write it out in a sentence? I said, absolutely, you can do that. I did that in my reverse outline, and so I told students, if you want to do something like this in your outline so you can see your topic sentence like actually written out, that's fine, but do the rest phrase-based. So she says, Garber rightly points out that character and personality now holds value that outweighs accreditation and a resume. And then she's got her plan for that in terms of what she's going to add and what she's going to bring in from the source. She probably needs to flip that a bit, because when you're framing your argument around somebody else's, you want to present what they say first and then you chime in. But she's got the right idea here and the right structure. So before we get too much into like what goes in the body sections, let's review what goes into the introduction. And we just saw that example in hers. You've got to have a hook, an attention getter, and it's better if you have something specific rather than a placeholder where you just have hook. Establishment of the issue, you've got that spelled out in outline form, and at least your thesis. A lot of people who have submitted their outlines already are missing their thesis in their outlines. And technically, a person who's reading your outline can't evaluate the rest if they don't know what it is you're arguing. Your thesis is the most important thing that you can have in an outline because it has your basic point in it. If you don't have that, then you force the reader to try to infer it. And depending on how your outline is created, it may be hard to infer. So here is a sample plan for an introduction. And for this one, I used the Hotel California hook for the lyric that says we're all prisoners of our own device, but I want to riff on that and say we're prisoners of our own devices, how we can't put them down, and how we get a lot of information from these various devices and digital forms of entertainment, and what the downsides of this are. So in this example, I'm pretending that I agree with Garber, and I'm reminding myself that I need to transition to Garber's argument from my hook and bring up the fact that she says that dystopian novels are not that far from our reality if we're not careful. There's her thesis, and then here is a sample thesis with some language baked in to show agreement. Garber rightly argues that entertainment threatens to diminish our empathy, grasp on the truth, and interest in the hard news. Notice how here I put the points that I intend to treat in, in this example: empathy, our grasp on the truth, interest in hard news. So here I picked one of her big but secondary points in the I believe it's the gaslit section near the beginning of that. If I were arguing, had a thesis that disagrees with her or that makes a concession and disagrees with her, this is an example of what I might have. Garber makes some fair points about the real and potential negative impact of entertainment on various aspects of society, but she overstates her points on its impacts on our grasp of the truth and interest in hard news, right? So I would just use the same strategy, present her thesis, but I'm going to, bake in some language that shows the points that I disagree with, and then my outline needs to follow that. In the body sections, many people who turned in the outline understood that, you've got to put Megan Garber's claims in, but some people did not fully understand the level of detail that needs to be there. Sometimes they just have general things, but what you really need is, it's almost like going shopping. You're choosing ingredients from her source, very, very specific things. So you have to be able to, after you present her claim and bake in your stance on that. So that's a thesis. But for your body sections, you've got to have, say a point on our grasp of the truth or interest in hard news. You got to present, well, what does she say about that? So her talking points, you got to pick at least one example, really just one example, to illustrate it so that you can present her argument fairly. And you need to be super careful about letting AI write your topic sentences for you or about making the choices for you. If you offload too much, it creates problems for you um, when it comes time to drafting, because those examples aren't yours. You may not be familiar with them. Those topic sentences, I've had some students use topic sentences that they don't really fully understand. Even if they could work, if it's not framed in a way that you grasp, in a way that you have thought about, then it's not a good one for you to use. That's kind of like when you go to AI and you offload too much, that's like asking somebody else to do it for you. That'd be like coming to my office and saying, "Hey, Ms. Bell, will you do my outline for me and just tell me what to write and just tell me the basic progression, tell me the examples to use." It might make your life easier in terms of turning in an outline, but then you might sit down and be like, "Well, gosh, she made an example on this thing that I don't even know what she's talking about. I haven't heard of that." And then you're thinking like, well, she put it here, so gee, I better use it. And so now you're looking things up. And if you start looking things up, then you're violating the terms of the assignment sheet, which stipulates that this isn't a research paper, it's a primary source paper. So you don't want to offload the thinking for the outline. The outline is for you to think through not only her points, but what you think about those points, how you're going to argue in relation to those, and what examples you're going to use. So that's the second half of what happens. And in terms of color coding in your outline, that's where you're coming in with your points, and they need to be super specific. What examples are you using from your own media consumption, your own knowledge of the news, of social media, those kinds of things? What are you using? What examples are you using that you don't have to look up, but that you're just already familiar with? Because everybody probably consumes news in some form or fashion, and is familiar with some form or fashion of social media or entertainment and those kinds of things. So you need to put very specific, like also shopping in your own brain for those kinds of things, and should be specific. And these things should come from you, not AI. If you ask AI or if you let it, it'll sure give you stuff for those things. But the parts in blue are not points that you're getting from AI and that you are presenting as your own. So you have to be very careful about those things. It's not that you can't get help from AI, but you want to be careful because when you use AI ideas that are not yours, that makes it hard for you to develop those because they didn't come from your brain. And a lot of times you're going to be a lot more creative and come up with really great things on your own. We already know, hopefully, about the purpose of the color coding. The things that you have in black are the very specific things that you're using from the Garber article. The examples, the arguments, and the ideas. And again, you really only need one example. You need her main argument and idea so you can present that fairly before you chime in. And the things that you're using from your own memory should be things that you really don't have to look up information on. So, because if you start doing that, it becomes a research paper, then you have to cite those things, and then this paper becomes something other than what was assigned. We have a research paper after this one. You're going to have plenty of opportunity to read a bunch of articles for that one, but for this one, we need to stick with just the Garber article. What I will let you do is sometimes you remember something, but you don't remember the details of it. So if it's something that you remember the gist of, but you're like, there's some kind of crucial detail that you don't remember, you can look that up, but don't look up, things that you don't know, and formally conduct research. Now here I'm coloring outside the lines right here because technically if you start looking things up and providing a lot of minute detail that, you had to look up, then, technically you would have to cite that. But just talking like if you just had to lightly refresh your memory on something, I'll allow that. But, I'm trusting you not to go overboard with that and not, basically turn this into a research paper that you didn't cite articles for. Um, in terms of what goes in the conclusion, this is more of a template right here of what goes in there. You need a natural transition from the last idea of your last body point. You need to tie back into something into the introduction. Often it'll be the hook. or maybe it's a specific image or idea, maybe something from the title. You'll want to talk about key takeaways and a call to action, and avoid just summarizing what you already said, because that's not what the purpose of a conclusion is. It's to give the audience something to think about. And if you want them to do something, to get them to do it. So if you want to get them to think about something, what are you going to do to get them to think about it? If you want them to actually do something, what are you going to do to persuade them to do those things? Or maybe you just want to leave them with some parting shots, some things to think about, and ultimately a line at the very, very end that kind of has some power and punch to it. It brings some satisfying closure, but that isn't corny or cliched. And ideally, you want to have a specific plan for this if you can, because if you just have placeholders, then you're just delaying the real work for figuring out what goes there later. One of my favorite tricks is to take whatever I've got in the intro. So I'm going to go back up to my little sample one here, and maybe I'm using some of the ideas here, and I'm gonna, you know, riff off of those, in my subtle tie back to something in the intro. I'm going to have a subtle tie back that's not forced. I'm going to try to make it natural. So a lot of times I look at the intro and the conclusion like bookends to the argument, and I want them to naturally fit together so that when the reader gets to the very end, it is like kind of like closing a good book. It's over, but there's something satisfying that lingers in the mind. That's what we're looking for. All right, now I want to shift gears just for a moment, and I want to talk about how to use AI effectively and ethically for outlines in my class. Keep in mind that I'm probably the only English professor that'll let you use AI for creating outlines, and your other professors have good reasons for forbidding it, because the danger is you can offload too much, and then it creates more problems than it solves. So I'm going to share with you the workflows that I think are best. Number one, I think it's best to do the outline all by yourself first and get AI feedback and revise it after the fact, not following the advice blindly, but evaluating it, weighing it, pushing back when you need to. The purpose of the outline, it's a thinking document. So the more you offload, the less thinking you're doing, the less presence you'll have in the paper, the less creativity you'll have in the paper. You may have logic in there, but it also may be hard for you to follow what somebody else gives you, because you've taken yourself out of the equation. So I recommend doing all of the outline first. The other workflow, if you are very diligent and you're engaged in the process, you should do as much of the outline by yourself as you can first, and then use AI as a tutor to help you fill in the gaps. Use it as a tutor to elicit things from you. So you'll tell it, like, don't do any part of the outline for me, but I'm concerned about my point on empathy because, and you're kind of explaining, and you can tell it, ask me questions to elicit thoughts and ideas that might help me fill in the gaps for this section, right? You're kind of giving it a role and telling it what to do, and not letting it overstep. You're letting it guide your thinking, but not, so you're using it to help you figure out what you think. You're not using it to give you ideas to put. Again, because if you, sometimes there's a place for that, but if you let it give you ideas or give you all of your ideas, then they're not your ideas. They're somebody else's or something else's. But the second workflow I envision is doing as much of it as you can by yourself, using AI as a tutor, maybe in the middle of the process or when you get stuck somewhere, um, and then getting AI feedback on the whole thing when you're done. I do think that you should always avoid leading with AI. Don't upload your stuff and say, create an outline for me, because again, it will create problems. And usually when students write those drafts, they have the structure, but they have trouble developing the meat or the flesh or the substance of the essay, because they have the structure, but the ideas aren't their own. so the thoughts are not coming, and they basically just repeat whatever AI gave them and try to stretch it out, and they fill up space without really saying a whole lot or developing or actually developing those points. I can envision one other thing where, that's kind of a variation on number 2, where you're using it as a tutor, kind of like if you go to the tutor or if you come to a professor, or if you come to me and you say, Ms. Bell, or Tutor Joe, I'm having trouble, even getting started on the outline. You can also use it as a tutor that does some hand holding, but you have to, even if you're doing that, you have to be careful to tell it not to do too much, not to do anything for you, but to guide your thinking, to kind of guide you through that. Before you do anything like that, though, you'd really need to go back and look at the lessons, at the examples, the videos, the article, and make sure that you process those things. Because sometimes when students are lost, it's not because the concepts are hard to understand or follow. It's because maybe they don't know the article as well as they could or should at that point, or maybe they haven't yet gone back into the article to figure out and fill in the gaps that they currently have, to identify a thesis, to identify topic sentences, and things like that. So choose a workflow. I think 1 or 2 are the best. Number 3, you definitely should avoid, not because you're going to get in trouble with me, but because I'm going to say, I see the AI presence here. It's a bit too much. I don't really see you. And I'm pretty good at seeing sometimes, even when you put stuff in blue, um, a lot of times I can tell that, well, that really came from AI and not from you, and I'm foreseeing some problems in drafting if you follow that. Be careful. So when you're getting feedback from AI, make sure that you're always providing context about the bigger assignment in this case, which would be the essay, and for the smaller context, which would be for the outline. And so to do that, you either have to explain to AI very precisely what your assignments is, and or provide actual files, but you do have to be careful on the number of files on the free tiers, because it can cut into the number of questions that you get. And when you're providing questions or providing context for AI, you need to tell it. You need to say, I am a student in a college rhetoric class working on an outline for, an essay on, and got to fill in the gaps and provide context, and then provide supporting documents, provide the Garber article, provide the assignment sheet, or a concrete description of it. So not all of these have to be files, but you need to provide context, either in the form of explanation or supporting documents. You might put in your reverse outline. Examples that I've provided, those could be in the form of screenshots. Sometimes I provide files. And you need to remember, so if you upload, and you're also going to need to upload a copy of your article, not your article, your outline, to get feedback on that. And when you do, it's important to understand that AI cannot see color unless you provide a screenshot of a Word file, or if you save it as a PDF. And if you save it as PDF, it ought to be able to see the color. And if you do a little screenshot of a snippet of an outline, it can see the color there. And again, note that the more documents you upload into a session, the more it cuts into your number of turns or questions in the conversation. This is especially true of Claude. Claude is the most stingy out of all of the AI platforms on the free tier, but it's really good. And in all of them, you should never really wait until the day of to get feedback on an assignment that you've been asked to submit, or that you've been asked to get feedback on and reflect on, to account for running out of questions. You should allow yourself some wiggle room to run out of questions, so you have time to return and ask more questions, or um, let them run out and go back to that thread later, so that you're not pressed for time. If you are pressed for time, you can also bounce to a different AI platform. So let's say you're on Claude, you run out of questions, and the clock is ticking and it's due that day. You can upload content to, say, Gemini, ChatGPT would be fine as a secondary, but remember, I want you to get exposure to the other large language models as part of this. And if you're doing a secondary on something, do that. But be sure to provide all of your threads. So if you use two different platforms, all your threads from those. You can also take your thread and you could turn that into a PDF. You can upload your conversation with one AI chatbot into another and say, hey, this is what Claude said. Do you agree? Do you disagree, with these kinds of things? Don't follow anything blindly, but you can do all kinds of things in terms of providing supporting documents to establish context for whatever it is that you're working on. You do always want to assign a role to it. You want to tell it, I want you to act as a tutor, or I want you to act as a thought partner or sounding board, or as I want you to act as a really smart classmate or a peer, and read my essay, not essay, my outline, to provide feedback on very specific things. You also have to lay down the law and establish ground rules for the AI and the limitations. So that means telling it not to do the outline for you, and that it should help and it should elicit ideas and examples from you, not give them to you, not feed them to you. And you have to be able to redirect it as needed and shut down any undesired behavior or drift. So drift is when it crosses the line from I'm helping you to I'm doing it for you. And AI is not the only entity or thing that can be guilty of this. Teachers and professors can be guilty of this too. They can start out helping, and then before you know it, they're showing so many examples or doing things that they're practically telling you how to approach arguing a given point. And when you do that, it's not desirable because, it's really hard to argue somebody else's point or somebody else's idea for how that should be approached. You're removing yourself from the equation. So you have to evaluate what it gives you. You have to think like you would if you're in a regular conversation with a person. So this is one reason why I always suggest talk to it like it is a person. We know it's not, but just for the sake of the conversation, treat it like it is. Push back when you need to, ask for clarification, push the conversation in new directions when needed, and be very specific in the questions you ask. Don't say, here's my outline, give me feedback. If you do that, it will give feedback, but it won't be targeted feedback and it won't be isolated to the things that you need. You always should be very specific in what you ask for, um, and have a conversation. It should be a back and forth where you're evaluating the responses carefully, holding your own in the conversation, and watching out for instances where it oversteps and does too much. Gemini, tends to do that. Claude tends to do that. ChatGPT tends to do it. And so you really have to set those parameters and keep it in check throughout the whole conversation. Um, and the conversation should always be a full conversation, not just one or two questions. It's not about having 40 questions or anything. You don't want to have so much that it's so overwhelming that you can't even sort through what the suggestions are. But enough for you to have some idea of some things that you might want to look at to revise or improve your outline, before you use it to help you draft your paper or before you submit it to me. Not that I take off points for imperfections in your outline, I don't. So when you see 100 on your outline, don't necessarily think, oh, I did this perfectly and there are no mistakes in there. I typically don't grade homework punitively. I grade it based on, did you do it in the right spirit? Did you follow directions? Is it a good faith effort? And usually if you do those things, you get full points. If you did all the things that I asked for, but I'll say, hey, this is a great job, great work ethic here, but I recommend that you do these things so that it's more useful to you when you draft. For this reason, this is why most everybody got feedback that says, I recommend you revise your draft if you turned it in. And then those students who also didn't do one at all got a note from me that says, hey, reach out with what questions you have because we need to get you on track. This assignment is meant to be helpful for you when it comes time to drafting the paper. So this is the aim, not just for this outline, but these kind of principles also apply for other outlines as well. So I'm going to make this document available. My reverse outline is available should you need it. I showed you a student outline from the current semester that doesn't have as much detail as some of the things that I have shown you, or the other student outline, but it's still very good. She got 100 on this, and I'm confident that this student will have, she's got a thesis, she's got her topic sentences framed around Garber, she's got a basic plan for those, so I am confident that her rough draft will be on track. It may not be perfect. None of our first drafts are going to be perfect, and that's never the aim. But the aim is that we have a clear thesis, we have clear topic sentences that are on prompt and on task and on the right article in this case, and a plan for the paper. So she has all those things. So I'm confident that her first draft will be on track and on target to a large degree, and that she'll have something that she can work with for draft 2. All right. And one last thing that I'll say before we wrap this up, remember that, in the previous video that you've seen, or the previous lesson that you saw about I normally recommend that when you're creating an outline that you list things by bullet points, but you don't have to do that. If you're comfortable just jumping right into the formal Roman numeral outline format, you can absolutely do that. When I was creating the outline for this video, I could jump right into the formal outline, but only because this is a process that I'm very familiar with. Usually when I'm working with an argument, I start out with bullet pointing what I'm going to use from their article, because I find it less constricting than a formal outline format. And then I also bullet point what I'm going to add in blue, and then I go back and clean that up. But I hope that you have found this useful. I'm going to wrap this so I can get it out. You're not required to redo the outline. Those who didn't turn one in are not required to do one, but I highly recommend that you do it, because what we don't want to have happen, and I want to make this clear, is that we don't want to have anyone turn to AI out of desperation to create a draft because they don't have a plan and they don't know where to start in terms of writing the paper. It's pretty easy to tell when the drafts are AI generated, and it creates a ton more work for me and a ton more work for students that do that, because you wouldn't be allowed to participate in the peer reviews, you wouldn't be allowed to participate in draft 2, and all the things that follow if you end up producing a draft that's AI generated or heavily AI influenced, that doesn't have your presence in there. We'll use AI in lots of really neat, interesting, and ethical ways in the class, but never to write our essays for us and never to do our thinking for us. So if you know you have too much AI involvement in some aspects of your outline, ideally we want to go back and make sure the ideas and examples are reflective of your thoughts and ideas, and not something that you got from AI, with few exceptions to that. Okay, that's it. That's a wrap. Y'all have a great day and a great week, and let me know if you have any questions.